During World War I, the Second Battle of Ypres was fought from the 22nd of April to the 25th of May 1915 for control of the strategic Flemish town of Ypres in western Belgium after the First Battle of Ypres the previous autumn. It was the first mass use by Germany of poison gas on the Western Front. For the first time, a former colonial force defeated a European power on European soil. Background: the battle consisted of 6 engagements. Battle of Gravenstaffel, Thursday the 22nd of April, Friday the 23rd of April 1915. Battle of Saint-Julien, Saturday the 24th of April the 4th of May. Battle of Frezenberg, 8 to 13 May. Battle of Bellewaarde, 24-25 May. Battle of Hooge, 30-31 July 1915. Second attack on Bellewaarde, the 25th of September. The Ypres salient followed the canal, bulging eastward around the town. North of the salient, the Belgian army held the line of the Yser, and the northern end of the salient was held by 2 French divisions. The eastern part of the salient was defended by 1 Canadian and 2 British divisions. The 2nd Corps and 5th Corps of the Second Army comprised the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Cavalry Divisions and the 4th, 27th, 28th Northumbrian, Lahore and 1st Canadian Divisions. Battle of Gravenstaffel Ridge in the hamlet of Gravenstaffel at about 5 p.m. On the 22nd of April, the German army released 168 long tons of chlorine gas over a 6.5 kilometers front on the line held by French territorial and colonial Moroccan and Algerian troops of the French 45th and 87th Divisions. Although poison gas had been used before, at the Battle of Belgium of 3 months earlier, the gas had liquefied in the cold and become inert. German troops carried 5,730 gas cylinders, weighing 90 pounds each, to the front by hand. The cylinders, opened by hand, relied on the prevailing wind to carry the gas towards enemy lines. Because of this method of dispersal, a large number of German soldiers were injured or killed while carrying out the attack. The French troops in the path of the gas cloud sustained about 6,000 casualties. Many died within 10 minutes, and many more were blinded. Chlorine gas forms hypochlorous acid when combined with water, destroying moist tissue such as the lungs and eyes. The chlorine gas, denser than air, quickly filled the trenches and forced the troops out into heavy enemy fire. Although many French troops ran for their lives, others stood their ground and waited for the cloud to pass. Field Marshal Sir John French, Commander-in-Chief of the British Army, wrote, "I wish particularly to repudiate any idea of attaching the least blame to the French division for this unfortunate incident. After all the examples our gallant allies have shown of dogged and tenacious courage in the many trying situations in which they have been placed throughout the course of this campaign, it is quite superfluous for me to dwell on this aspect of the incident, and I would only express my firm conviction that, if any troops in the world had been able to hold their trenches in the face of such a treacherous and altogether unexpected onslaught, the French division would have stood firm." Anthony R. Harsack of the Queen Victoria's Rifles described the chaos as the French colonial corps troops fled from the gas. Plainly something terrible was happening. What was it? Officers, and staff officers too, stood gazing at the scene, awestruck and dumbfounded, for in the northerly breeze there came a pungent, nauseating smell that tickled the throat and made our eyes smart. The horses and men were still pouring down the road. 2 or 3 men on a horse I saw, while over the field streamed mobs of infantry, the dusky warriors of French Africa. Away went their rifles, equipment, even the tunics, that they might run the faster. One man came stumbling through our lines. An officer of ours held him up with leveled revolver. "What's the matter, you bloody lot of cowards?" says he. The Zouave was frothing at the mouth, his eyes started from their sockets, and he fell writhing at the officer's feet. A 4-mile gap was left in the front line. The German High Command had not foreseen the effectiveness of the new weapon, and all available troops had been transferred to Russia, leaving few reserves in the west. General von Falkenhayn, chief of the German General Staff, had ordered the attack as a limited effort by the German Fourth Army. German troops advanced at 5 p.m., but dusk. Apprehension about the effect of the gas and the lack of reserves prevented the Germans from exploiting the gap more significantly. Canadian troops defended the flank of the break-in by urinating into cloth and holding them to their faces to counter the effects of the gas. Casualties were especially heavy for the 13th Battalion of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, which was enveloped on 3 sides and overextended in securing its left flank when the Algerian Division broke. At Kitchener's Wood, the 10th Battalion of the 2nd Canadian Brigade was ordered to counter-attack in the gap created by the gas attack. They formed up after 11 p.m. on the 22nd of April, with the 16th Battalion of the 3rd Brigade arriving to support the advance. Both battalions attacked with over 800 men, in waves of 2 companies each, at 11:46 p.m. Without reconnaissance, the battalions ran into obstacles halfway to their objective, engaged in small arms fire from the wood. They began an impromptu bayonet charge. The attack cleared the former oak plantation of Germans at a 75% casualty rate. The Germans set fire to a chemical product of sulfur chloride which they had placed in front of their own trenches, causing a thick yellow cloud to be blown towards the trenches of the French and Belgians. The cloud of smoke advanced like a yellow low wall, overcoming all those who breathed in poisonous fumes. The French were unable to see what they were doing or what was happening. The Germans then charged, driving the bewildered French back past their own trenches. Those who were enveloped by the fumes were not able to see each other half a yard apart. I have seen some of the wounded who were overcome by the sulfur fumes, and they were progressing favorably. The effect of the sulfur appears to be only temporary. The after effects seem to be a bad swelling of the eyes, but the sight is not damaged. Dusk was falling when from the German trenches in front of the French line rose that strange green cloud of death. The light northeasterly breeze wafted it toward them, and in a moment death had them by the throat. One cannot blame them that they broke and fled. In the gathering dark of that awful night they fought with the terror, running blindly in the gas cloud, and dropping with breasts heaving in agony and the slow poison of suffocation mantling their dark faces. Hundreds of them fell and died, others lay helpless, froth upon their agonized lips and their racked bodies powerfully sick, with tearing nausea at short intervals. They too would die later, a slow and lingering death of agony unspeakable. The whole air was tainted with the acrid smell of chlorine that caught at the back of men's throats and filled their mouths with its metallic taste. Battle of Saint-Julien. The village of Saint-Julien was in the rear of the 1st Canadian Division until the poison gas attack of the 22nd of April, when it became the front line. Some of the first fighting in the village involved the stand of Lance Corporal Frederick Fisher of the 13th Battalion CEF's machine gun detachment. Fisher went out twice with a handful of men and a Colt machine gun, preventing advancing German troops from passing through Saint-Julien into the rear of the Canadian front line. He was killed the following day. On the morning of the 24th of April, the Germans released another gas cloud towards the reformed Canadian line just west of Saint-Julien. Word was passed to the troops to urinate on their handkerchiefs and place them over their nose and mouth. The countermeasures were insufficient, and German troops took the village. The next day the York and Durham Brigade units of the Northumberland Division counter-attacked, failing to secure their objectives but establishing a new line closer to the village. On the 26th of April the Northumberland Brigade attacked again and gained a foothold in the village, but were forced back with the loss of more than 1,940 casualties. Despite hundreds of casualties, the 2nd Royal Dublin Fusiliers participated without respite in the battles at Frezenberg and Bellewaarde. On the 24th of April the battalion, subjected to a German gas attack near Saint-Julien, was nearly annihilated. The German army first used chlorine gas cylinders in April 1915 against the French army at Ypres, when yellow-green clouds drifted towards the Allied trenches. The gas had a distinctive odor, resembling pineapple and pepper. The French officers, assuming at first that the German infantry were advancing behind a smoke screen, alerted the troops. When the gas reached the front Allied trenches, soldiers began to complain of chest pains and a burning sensation in the throat. Captain Francis Scrimger of the 2nd Canadian Field Ambulance may have passed the order to use urine to counteract the gas. Soldiers realized they were being gassed, and many ran as fast as they could. An hour after the attack began, there was a 1,500 yards gap in the Allied line. Fearing the chlorine, few German soldiers moved forward, and the delay enabled Canadian and British troops to retake the position before the Germans could exploit the gap. After the first German chlorine gas attacks, Allied troops were supplied with masks of cotton pads soaked in urine. It had been discovered that the ammonia in the pad neutralized the chlorine. The pads were held over the face until the gas dispersed. Other soldiers preferred to use a handkerchief, sock or flannel body belt, dampened with a sodium bicarbonate solution and tied across the mouth and nose, until the gas passed. Soldiers found it difficult to fight like this, and attempts were made to develop a better means of protection against gas attacks. By July 1915, soldiers received efficient gas masks and anti-asphyxiation respirators. Private W. Hay of the Royal Scots arrived in Ypres just after the chlorine gas attack on the 22nd of April 1915. We knew there was something was wrong. We started to march towards Ypres, but we couldn't get past on the road with refugees coming down the road. We went along the railway line to Ypres, and there were people, civilians and soldiers, lying along the roadside in a terrible state. We heard him say it was gas. We didn't know what the hell gas was. When we got to Ypres we found a lot of Canadians lying there dead from gas the day before, poor devils. And it was quite a horrible sight for us young men. I was only 20, so it was quite traumatic, and I've never forgotten nor ever will forget it. The French soldiers were naturally taken by surprise. Some got away in time, but many, alas, not understanding the new danger, were not so fortunate, and were overcome by the fumes and died poisoned. Among those who escaped, nearly all cough and spit blood, the chlorine attacking the mucous membrane. The dead were turned black at once. About 15 minutes after letting the gas escape, the Germans got out of their trenches. Some of them were sent on in advance, with masks over their heads, to ascertain if the air had become breathable. Having discovered that they could advance, they arrived in large numbers in the area on which the gas had spread itself some minutes before, and took possession of the arms of the dead men. They made no prisoners. Whenever they saw a soldier whom the fumes had not quite killed, they snatched away his rifle and advised him to lie down, to die better. Battle of Frezenberg. The Germans moved field artillery forward, placing 3 Army Corps opposite the 27th and 28th Divisions on the Frezenberg Ridge. The German attack began on the 8th of May with a bombardment of the 83rd Brigade in trenches on the forward slope of the ridge, but the 1st and 2nd Infantry assaults were repelled by the survivors. However, the 3rd German assault of the morning pushed the defenders back. Although the neighbouring 80th Brigade repulsed the attack, the 84th Brigade was pushed back. This left a 2-mile gap in the line. The Germans were prevented from advancing further by Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry's counterattacks and a night move by the 10th Brigade. The PPCLI held the line at a steep cost. Their 700-man force were reduced to 150, who were in no shape to fight. After this, their unofficial motto, "Holding up the whole damn line," is still used today. Battle of Bellewaarde on the 24th of May. The Germans released a gas attack on a 7-kilometer front near Hooge. Although British troops defended against initial German attacks, they were eventually forced to retreat north and south. Failed British counterattacks forced a British retreat 1 kilometer northwards. At the end of the battle, the Ypres salient was 5 kilometers deep. Aftermath analysis. By the end of the battle, the Ypres salient was compressed, with Ypres closer to the line. The city, bombarded by artillery fire, was demolished. Although poison gas had been used on the Eastern Front, it surprised the Allies, and about 7,000 gas casualties were transported in field ambulances and treated in casualty clearing stations. In May and June, 350 British deaths were recorded from gas poisoning. Both sides developed gas weapons and countermeasures, which changed the nature of gas warfare. The French and British used gas at the Battle of Loos in late September. Gas protection was somewhat improved with the issue of improvised respirators made from cotton waste pads impregnated with sodium hyposulfite, sodium bicarbonate and glycerin. The respirators made little difference, however, due to lack of training and the use of local contraptions and poorly made items imported from Britain. The P helmet, soaked in sodium phenate, was issued by December 1915, and the PH helmet was issued in early 1916. Although the Canadian Division mounted an effective defense, it lost 5,975 men by its withdrawal on 3 May. The division was unprepared for the warfare prevailing on the Western Front, where linear tactics were ineffective against attackers armed with magazine rifles and machine guns. The Canadian field artillery had been effective, but the deficiencies of the Ross rifle worsened tactical difficulties. The Canadian Division received several thousand replacements shortly after the battle. Casualties after the war. German casualties from the 21st of April to the 30th of May were recorded as 34,933 by the official historians of the Rijksarchive. In the British official history, E. Edmonds and G. C. Wayne recorded British losses of 59,275 casualties, the French about 18,000 casualties on the 22nd of April and another 3,973 from 26 to 29 April. Canadian casualties from the 22nd of April to the 3rd of May were 5,975, of whom about 1,000 men were killed. The worst day was the 24th of April, when 3,058 casualties were sustained during infantry attacks, artillery bombardments and gas discharges. Subsequent operations. An operation known as the First Attack on Bellewaarde was conducted by the 3rd Division of 5th Corps on 16 June 1915, and the Second Attack on Bellewaarde, a larger operation, was conducted by the 3rd Division and the 14th Division of 6th Corps from 25–26 September 1915. The Battle of Montreal, south of Ypres, with the 20th Division of 14th Corps and the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Canadian Divisions of the Canadian Corps, took place from 2 to 13 June 1916. The Third Battle of Ypres, also known as the Battle of Passchendaele, was fought in the fall of 1917. Commemoration. Canadian participation in the Battle of Gravenstafel is commemorated on the Saint-Julien Memorial in the village. During the Second Battle of Ypres, Lt. Col. John Alexander McRae MD, of Guelph wrote, "In Flanders Fields, in the voice of those who perished in the war." Published in Punch 8 December 1915, the poem is still recited on Remembrance Day and Memorial Day. Lance Sergeant Elmer Cotton described the effects of chlorine gas in 1915. It produces a flooding of the lungs. It is an equivalent death to drowning only on dry land. The effects of these are splitting headache and terrific thirst. a knife edge, a pain in the lungs, and the coughing up of a greenish froth off the stomach and the lungs, ending finally in insensibility and death. The color of the skin from white turns a greenish black and yellow, the color protrudes and the eyes assume a glassy stare. It is a fiendish death to die. Victoria Cross recipients: Lance Sergeant D. W. Belcher, London Rifle Brigade, 11th Brigade, 4th Division. Captain E. D. W. 7th Battalion, British Columbia Regiment, 2nd Canadian Brigade, 1st Canadian Division. Jameda Mirdas, 55th Rifles, Ferozepur Brigade, Lahore Division. Lance Corporal F. Fisher, 13th Battalion, Royal Highlanders of Canada, 3rd Canadian Brigade, 1st Canadian Division. Company Sergeant Major F. W. Hall, 8th Battalion, Winnipeg Rifles, 2nd Canadian Brigade. Private J. Lynn, 2nd Lancashire Fusiliers, 12th Brigade, 4th Division. 2nd Lieutenant W. B. Rhodes Morehouse, 2 Squadron, Royal Flying Corps. Captain F. A.C. Scrimger, 14th Battalion, Royal Montreal Regiment. Corporal I. Smith, 1st Manchester's, Jalandhar Brigade, Lahore Division. Private E. Warner, 1st Bedfordshire's, 15th Brigade, 5th Division.